Much worse than that.
Our special guests tonight, two congressmen who have been instrumental in exposing deep state corruption at the FBI and the DOJ. Congressman Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz join me. Also with us, Fox News legal analysts Greg Jarrett and Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch, an organization which today filed a Freedom of Information lawsuit for documents related to the FBI's abuse of its surveillance powers. More now on the release of the House Intel Committee with the chairman of the House Intel Committee, Congressman Devin Nunes, moments ago explaining why it was so important to release the memo. Take a listen.
The sad part is that I have an obligation to the American people when we see FISA abuse, so these are secret courts that exist, to target for foreigners, for catching terrorists, for catching people who might be bad actors. And the American citizens that are represented before this court have to be protected. And the only place that can protect them is the U.S. Congress when abuses do occur.
Did you write
So it's not a place we wanted to go. It's not a place we wanted to go, but it's where we had to go.
Did you read the actual FISA applications?
No, I didn't.
Now, as you heard, Nunes admitting he didn't actually read the FISA application, but House Oversight Chair Trey Gowdy, who helped write the memo, did. Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge was the first journalist to obtain excerpts of the memo and has this report.
The newly declassified 4-page Republican staff memo makes the case that the secret National Security Court was kept in the dark by the FBI and Justice Department when they sought and secured a surveillance warrant for Trump campaign aide Carter Page. The memo says the court was never told the former British spy, who was paid by Democrats to put together the Trump dossier, had a personal animus toward the presidential nominee. In September 2016, Christopher Steele admitted to Justice Department official Bruce Orr his feelings against then-candidate Trump when Steele said he, quote, was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. Orr was recently demoted over his contacts with Steele and Glenn Simpson, whose opposition research firm Fusion GPS directed the Trump project. Bank records obtained by the House committee show Orr's wife Nellie worked for Fusion GPS and began investigating Trump as early as May 2016. Republican investigators said the court was also never told about the dossier's political roots. Neither the initial FISA application in October 2016 nor any of the renewals disclose or reference the role of the DNC, Clinton campaign, or any party campaign in funding Steele's efforts, even though the political origins of the Steele dossier were then known to senior DOJ and FBI officials. According to the memo, Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe testified before the committee in December 2017 that no surveillance warrant would have been sought without the Steele dossier information. McCabe was removed earlier this week. British court records show Fusion GPS directed Steele to quietly brief a half-dozen American media outlets in the fall of 2016, but the majority did not go with the story. But one who did was apparently used to justify FBI surveillance. The Carter Page FISA application also cited extensively a September 23, 2016 Yahoo News article by Michael Isikoff, which focuses on Page's July 2016 trip to Moscow. In a Fox interview last spring, Page denied working with the Russians.
I have never broken any law or done anything untoward in Russia or relating to any Russian person.
According to the memo, an FBI counterintelligence chief said the corroboration of the Steele dossier was in the early stages, even as the initial Page FISA application was submitted. Days before the inauguration, Comey later testified he told the president-elect at Trump Tower the dossier was, quote, salacious and unverified. But strikingly, the dossier was used repeatedly to renew the surveillance of Page by Comey, his deputy McCabe, then Obama Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, and later by Trump appointee Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Republicans raised the specter of legality over the handling of the Trump dossier and representations made to the FISA court. Today, the Attorney General sent a formal referral to the Inspector General for investigation. David?
Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. Well, our first guest tonight says the memo details a wanton miscarriage of justice and the stuff of tin pot dictatorships and banana republics, not the United States of America. Joining me now is Congressman Matt Gaetz, who serves on a number of key committees, including Judiciary, Budget, and Armed Services. I got to tell you, Congressman, I covered Latin America for 12 years. I think you're absolutely right. The rule of law is what differentiates the United States from most of the other banana republics in the world. And this is a breakdown in the rule of law.
It's absolutely right, David. And my hope is that we'll be able to get past some of the statements that Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats have put out and actually work on this in a bipartisan way. I think that all Americans, Republicans, Democrats, independents, should be concerned about a government that would take a political opposition research document and then use that as a basis to spy on American citizens. We've all got a stake to ensure that that never happens again.
Now, on Fox News Channel, Bret Baier was just talking to Mr. Nunes, who suggested that nobody in the committee actually saw the FISA applications. How did you then discover that the Trump dossier played such a key role in getting that warrant?
Well, the Intelligence Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Oversight Committee have all been conducting sworn depositions of key members of the FBI and Department of Justice, and the statement about the dossier forming the fundamental basis for this FISA application largely came from the testimony of Andrew McCabe, the Deputy Director of the FBI, who just abruptly resigned days ago. McCabe said in his deposition that without the dossier, there never would have been a basis to spy on Americans. Now, Democrats are saying today, David, that, well, there was the concern about Papadopoulos and an offhand statement he made at a bar. But remember, McCabe said that would never have been sufficient. It may have been necessary, but never sufficient to get a FISA warrant. It was the dossier that did that. A dossier so uncredible that it was a Yahoo News article written by Mr. Isikoff, planted by Christopher Steele, that was the authenticating evidence for the dossier. So circular logic, circular facts, and a real erosion of our process.
Now, will Americans get a chance to view that FISA warrant? I mean, we're going to see they're probably going to see the Democratic memo, which will undoubtedly pour cold water or attempt to on the Republican memo. It would be great if Americans could judge for themselves by looking at the FISA warrant. Undoubtedly would have to be redacted, but looking at it ourselves to see which memo is correct.
Well, absolutely right. The facts that are laid out in the majority memo are verifiable. They can be proven, and that's one of the reasons why Congressman Lee Zeldin ensured that the letter that we prepared to Chairman Nunes, signed by over 60 Republicans, demands not only the release of the memo, but authenticating evidence to the extent to which that doesn't put national security in jeopardy. So this isn't the last you'll be hearing from us. There's a lot more to come. There's more information that we'll be getting into the public square, but for now, we should be very troubled by what we've learned.
Well, one thing that troubled me was to see Rod Rosenstein's name on there as one of the people who signed off on at least one of the FISA warrants, or at least a reapplication of a FISA warrant. If he was aware of the fact that the Trump dossier was a piece of partisan smear job that was paid for by the Democratic committee, and if he furthermore did not share that information with the FISA court, should he be gone?
Well, I'm not going to get into the HR policies of the administration. I'll leave that to the president. I will say that you've correctly identified the omissions in the application to the FISA court, not just the misrepresentations. It is outrageous that the FISA court was left in the dark about the very genesis of this dossier, the Democratic National Committee. It's also outrageous that even after Mr. Steele was terminated by the FBI and not paid because he was deemed unreliable for leaking information to the media, Mr. Rosenstein still signed off on renewals of this warrant. So that's some really bad conduct that needs to be explained to the Congress, the president, and the American people.
Well, I'll tell you what else is outrageous is the fact that a bunch of virulently anti-Trump officials at the FBI and the Justice Department, we know that now, looking at their memos and their emails and what their spouses were doing, et cetera, that they used a piece of a partisan smear job that was paid for by the Democratic committee in order to get FISA warrants. And Adam Schiff claims that revelation in the form of the memo today was an overhyped political job. I mean, to suggest that something that significant, and again, we have to get all of the facts straight here, but if everything in that memo bears out, do you think it's fair to call it overhyped in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I'll leave that to the American people to decide, but I don't know anyone who's comfortable with the notion that if you hire the spouse of the right official at the Department of Justice, that you could take a political opposition research document and get that into the intelligence bloodstream. Let's not forget, Bruce Orr's profile, his portfolio, included drug interdiction and drug enforcement issues, but all of a sudden he's meeting with Christopher Steele and Glenn Simpson both before and after the election, and he is valeting political information into the Justice Department. That really is something that needs explaining, and we've got to have legislation so that that never happens again, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Well, if it all bears out, it is totally repugnant to the rule of law, and as you correctly point out, it is the rule of law that differentiates the United States from a banana republic. We have to maintain that rule of law. Congressman Matt Gaetz, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
We're coming right back with much more. Please stay with us. President Trump blasting politicized leadership at the FBI and DOJ as the explosive FISA memo is released. Will the deep state be held accountable? We'll take that up with Greg Jarrett and Congressman Jim Jordan. And the president issuing a new warning to North Korea while hitting his predecessors for failing to stop the rogue regime.
We have many administrations that should have acted on this a long time ago when it wasn't at this kind of when we weren't in this kind of a position.
Those details and much more when we return. Stay with Former FBI Director James Comey couldn't keep his opinions to himself following the release of the House Intel memo, tweeting out, "That's it. Dishonest and misleading memo wrecked the House Intel Committee, destroyed trust with intelligence community, damaged relationship with the FISA court, and exclusively exposed classified investigation of an American citizen for what? DOJ and FBI must keep doing their jobs." Well, House Intel Committee Chairman Devin Nunes firing back this evening. Take a listen.
Mr. Comey's welcome to come back. Tell us when exactly he learned that the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign paid for the dossier. He's welcome to come back and share that information. But I think the American people understand that the FBI should not go to secret courts using information that was paid for by the Democrats to open up investigations and get warrants on people of the other political party. That's the type of stuff that happens in banana republics.
Joining me now is Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. Greg, I thought it was a bombshell, and I'll tell you specifically, drawing from the memo itself, the political origins of the dossier, talking about the Trump dossier, were known to senior DOJ officials. They knew it was a political hack job, paid for by the DNC. They knew it was political, but they withheld that information from the FISA judge. It was misrepresented as real intel when it was a political hack job. That seems to me, if it's not illegal, it should be. Is there any crime that was committed there?
Two different crimes. One of them's perjury. The other one's abuse of power. Perjury because they signed an affidavit, the Department of Justice and FBI people, affirming that to the best of their knowledge, these documents, the dossier, is authentic and reliable. When they now we know that they knew it wasn't authentic and reliable. They knew it came from Democratic money. They knew that it was likely fabricated, and they knew they couldn't get a FISA warrant without it. And it was authored by a guy who hated Trump. He said he was desperate to stop Trump. They concealed that from the FISA judge. They deceived the court. That's a fraud on the court. And when they signed that affidavit under penalty of perjury, they were lying to the judge. That's perjury. The other is abuse of power. 18 U.S.C. 242. And it basically says that you can't abuse your position in government to interfere with somebody's constitutional rights. Here, the right to privacy of Carter Page. He was spied on with a fake document. That's an abuse of power. 10 years behind bars upon conviction.
Now, who prosecutes? If there were laws broken, the Department of Justice cannot investigate itself, particularly in light of what we've now discovered.
That's exactly why you need a second special counsel, which I've been calling for months in columns, in appearances with you and others here at Fox News. You can't trust the Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute itself. You have to have a second special counsel.
If true, not only is this a flaw with the FBI and the Department of Justice, but it's also a flaw in FISA. Now, Rand Paul, for years, has been criticizing the FISA process, saying that 99.9% of every application is approved by the FISA court. This is an indication of what little evidence is necessary to get a FISA approval to spy on Americans. Do we need to change that process?
We do. This is a prime example of how secrecy begats corruption. When it's a star chamber and only the judge is looking at it, one person, he can be deceived and lied to. And look, I know it's very difficult. You can't have public court hearings for something like this, but there need to be safeguards put in place to make sure that people like Comey and McCabe and Peter Strzok and, Rod Rosenstein, who was involved in this and knew that it was a fabricated document. That you have to be able to stop these people.
I hope that's not an omen. The S&P down 60 and the NASDAQ tumbling 145 points. Volume on the big board heavy at 4.3 billion shares. Stocks posting the biggest weekly drop since 2016. The Dow and S&P down about 4% and the NASDAQ down 3.5% on the week. Stocks falling as interest rates spike, the yield on the 10-year hitting the highest level in 4 years. The economy, though, adding 200,000 jobs in January, with unemployment holding steady at 4.1%. Wages posting the biggest gain since 2009, up 2.9% from a year ago. And a reminder to listen to Lou's reports 3 times a day, coast to coast, on the Salem Radio Network. Coming up next, President Trump today leaving the door open to firing Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
Does it make you more likely to fire Rosenstein? Do you still have confidence in him after reading the memo?
You figure that one out.
We'll discuss the fallout of the explosive memo in the DOJ. Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said it was, quote, a bouquet from the president to Vladimir Putin. House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes dismissed their criticisms tonight on Special Report.
These are the same Democrats who never wanted to start an investigation. These are the same Democrats who blocked our subpoenas or tried to block our subpoenas back in August. So these are not honest actors. They know they're not being honest actors. And, I get tired of playing whack-a-mole every day with the Democrats on this committee who never wanted to start this investigation in the first place.
Joining me now is Washington Examiner chief political correspondent and Fox Business contributor Byron York, who last night told us that Carter Page was going to be at the heart of this memo. And indeed, here's the memo, the second paragraph. It's about Carter Page. How did you know?
Oh, I don't know. It was just out there. It was just out there. Listen, I think the two really big things out of this memo are that, one, the dossier, it says, was a central part, an essential part of the application to wiretap Carter Page. And then the other thing was when Andrew McCabe, the FBI's number 2, said that without a dossier, they wouldn't have applied for a wiretap
Well, I think,
warrant.
Byron, there's another key point here, which is that the committee knew that the people who were putting together this application for the FISA warrant knew that this was a DNC-financed Trump dossier, that it was financed by them, and apparently they withheld that information from the FISA judge. I think that was critical, don't you?
Yes, if they did not make that clear to the judge, that would be a huge thing.
How can we find that out? Forgive me for interrupting, but how specifically can we find out whether it was purposely withheld from the judge, which, according to Greg Jarrett, who we just heard from, would be a crime?
Well, the first thing we need to do is to find out if it was ever mentioned even in an oblique way in the application. So we need to see the application. Bigger point on this, by the way, is one of the most salutary effects of releasing this memo is that it has created momentum to release more things. So we do need to see this FISA application. The Andrew McCabe quote, that's being disputed. It's not a quote in the memo, but the reference to what he said, that interview needs to be released. And the Democrats' memo, that needs to be released. So I think this may, if not open the floodgates, at least may break open some things that we can see.
You know, the other thing is that some of the criticisms of this memo actually do lead to support other suspicions that people like you and I have had about all this process. A lot of the critics say that the memo, that the focusing on Carter Page, you didn't need the Trump dossier for that because he'd been in the crosshairs of the FBI for quite some time. His Russian connections were considered very important. But the fact that they brought the Trump dossier in just shows you that their target was not Carter Page. Their target was Donald Trump. That's why they brought the Trump dossier into the FISA application. Am I wrong on that?
Well, you have to remember, you're absolutely right about the dossier. The target of the dossier, of course, was Donald Trump. In the very first installment said that there had been this long relationship between Trump and the Kremlin going back for years. And remember, people should read the dossier if they haven't seen it. It's on the web. You can take a look at it. It made very, very specific accusations. For example, it said that Carter Page, when he visited Moscow, was offered millions of dollars in exchange for lifting United States sanctions on Russia. Now, it's not clear how Carter Page was going to lift U.S. sanctions on Russia, but it's a very specific point in the dossier. There are things that could be proved or not proved. And so far, of those incendiary allegations, and there are several, as far as we know, none have been confirmed.
By the way, we should mention that another party that was very interested in removing the sanctions on Russia, not just Mr. Putin, but also the Fusion GPS people who were out to discredit those people who put the sanctions on Russia. That was one of their purposes. And again, it points to the fact that if there was any collusion at all, remember, Fusion GPS was paid for by the DNC and by the Hillary campaign. They were working with people that were very closely connected to Putin and Putin's interests in Russia. So if there was any collusion here, again, it looks much more like it was collusion between the Democrats and Russia than Trump and Russia, correct?
Well, Fusion was definitely working both sides of the street on this, because we know they were hired by Putin-linked Russians to work on this anti-Magnitsky Act campaign, the campaign they wanted the United States to repeal these sanctions against Russia. So they were working with the Russians on that. And then if you look at the dossier, it quotes source A and source B and source C. And one of them is a Kremlin official, one of them is a former Kremlin official, another one's a big businessman who's connected to the Kremlin. And you have to think, wait a minute, I mean, maybe the Russians are feeding that information to Fusion GPS and thus to the Democratic National Committee, and Fusion is really on both sides of this thing.
Right. Well, clearly they were on the side of Putin, and they were on the side of the people that were trying to smear Donald Trump, in particular the DNC. Byron York, thank you very much. We're going to be quite busy. I'm going to be seeing more of you in the coming weeks.
Thank you, David.
Coming right back with a lot more. Please stay with us. Corruption exposed. Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch and Congressman Jim Jordan on why the House intel memo could mean the end of the road for corrupt FBI and DOJ leadership who conspired to keep President Trump out of the White House. And find out what happens when you mix motorcycles and roller coasters. We're going to show you the jaw-dropping video coming next. Sanders put out a statement expanding on the president's thoughts, saying, quote, "The memorandum raises serious concerns about the integrity of decisions made at the highest levels of the Department of Justice and the FBI to use the government's most intrusive surveillance tools against American citizens." Meanwhile, at the Department of Justice, Attorney General Jeff Sessions also released a statement that said, quote, "I have great confidence in the men and women of this department, but no department is perfect. Accordingly, I will forward to appropriate DOJ components all information I receive from Congress regarding this. I'm determined that we will fully and fairly ascertain the truth." Joining me now is Chris Farrell, Director of Investigations and Research for Judicial Watch, which today filed a lawsuit for documents on how the Obama Justice Department justified spying on the Trump campaign. And Chris, I have to ask, the FISA warrant applications, so many questions about what resolved, about whether they were keeping information, the Justice and FBI people, from the FISA court, about the origins of the Trump dossier, et cetera. Are you trying to get copies of the FISA applications?
Yes, we are. And we think it's absolutely critical that the public be able to see these applications and see the underlying declarations or sworn affidavits from the special agents who would have had to have firsthand personal knowledge of the investigation and swear out those declarations as a component or as a part of the overall warrant application. And, you know, those warrant applications are signed by at least the Deputy Attorney General, if not the Attorney General. And so in this case, you would have documentation, firsthand account by a special agent or a attorney from the Department of Justice, and then a cover packet or letter as part of the application signed by someone at the Deputy Attorney General level that would be submitted to the FISA court. So this would lay out the entire record. This would make it indisputable.
So we would be able, forgive me for interrupting, we would be able to tell by looking at this application whether or not the FISA judge was told about the origins of the Trump dossier, that it was financed by the DNC,
correct,
that it was a political hit job, et cetera. We would be able to tell that if we saw the application.
Correct. And importantly, you would see with each renewal or reapplication every 90 days, you know, are they making the same assertions? If in fact they've come across information that would change the story or in some way provide new insight for the judge, they have an affirmative obligation to correct the record.
Yes.
And so instead of just repeating the same lie over and over again, they would have to make it correct with the court.
And Chris, is that obligation required of everybody who signs the FISA reapplications? Because as you know, at least one of those reapplications was signed by Rod Rosenstein.
Correct, and that's what's so critical. So the special agents from the FBI or any other federal law enforcement executing the affidavit or the sworn declaration in support of the warrant, they have an affirmative obligation, and certainly the attorneys within DOJ or FBI, they too have an affirmative obligation to the court to provide all information, not cherry pick, not play little semantic word games, but lay it all out. And that's why this is so critical. And keep in mind, Comey was involved in all this.
Former FBI Director Comey.
Correct, correct. So this is, you know, when he's tweeting out his slow motion sort of breakdown that he's having, where one moment he's saying one thing and the next thing he says, so what?
Well, he's talking his book, to give it a Wall Street phrase.
Exactly. And in this case, you know, the leaker, the sworn under oath guy who admits that he leaked this stuff, you know, when he critiques the lawful actions of the president to declassify something, I mean, the irony is rich.
It sure is. And I got to say, if there was ever an application for the Freedom of Information Act, this is it. And we wish you best of luck getting hold of those applications. Please share them with us as soon as you do. Chris Farrell.
We will. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, folks, please roll the video. This world-class athlete taking us on a roller coaster adventure unlike any other. This is in Mexico City. Somehow that's apropos. Watch as he races across the wooden roller coaster on his bike. He reaches an incredible 108 feet, the very top of the roller coaster, before he comes racing down, flipping over. Unbelievable. All right. Coming up next, one of the lawmakers who has been at the forefront of ending answers about the unverified anti-Trump dossier, Congressman Jim Jordan, joining me to discuss the revelations in the House Intel memo and where we go from here. That's next.
We are the
Our next guest was one of the first lawmakers to call for the release of the memo. Joining me now is Congressman Jim Jordan. He's a member of the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees. Congratulations. I think most Americans are very happy to know this information. Now, we are going to presumably see the Democrat memo, are we not?
Yep. Yeah, at some point that'll come out too.
Okay.
Which I'm all in favor of.
If that happens, and undoubtedly the Democratic memo is going to suggest that some of what you say or some of what the Republican memo says is wrong, that is that perhaps the Trump dossier was not as instrumental in getting those FISA warrants, don't we deserve to see the actual applications for the FISA warrants?
David, I asked Director Wray this back in December. Show us what was used to take to the court. Show us what you put together to actually make that application to the court. Let's see that. They can bring that to the Judiciary Committee, which I'm a member of. We can see it in a closed setting, but I'm for making that public so the American people can see what took place here. Never forget what we learned today. They took a salacious and unverified document, this dossier, salacious and unverified. That's what James Comey called it. Right. They took it to a secret court to get a secret warrant to spy on a fellow citizen. And when they went to that court, they didn't tell him important information like who paid for the document. They didn't tell him that. Not once, not twice, not even 3 times. 4 times they went to the court and didn't disclose who was financing this document. And they did it in the context of a presidential campaign. That is not supposed to work that way.
And let's remember who they are. They were people who were virulently anti-Trump. We know that from at least the Strzok memos or texts with Lisa Page that they were going to do anything to keep Donald Trump out of the White House, even having some kind of insurance policy. And of course, they kept referring to Andy. We assume it was Andy McCabe. Of course, they had a friend over in the Justice Department, Bruce Orr, whose wife was actually working for the people who did the Trump dossier. So these people had a political agenda, and they used the extraordinary powers of the FBI and Department of Justice to pursue their political goals.
These top people went to the secret court to get a warrant to spy on an American citizen, and they used an opposition research document to get that warrant, and they didn't tell them about who paid for it, and they didn't tell them what you just said, David. They didn't tell them about Bruce Orr's relationship with Chris Steele. They didn't tell them about his wife's relationship with Fusion, that she was working for Fusion. Important pieces of information that they failed to tell the court. 4 different times they didn't disclose that information.
So, Congressman,
what's wrong.
Where do we go from here? The Justice Department cannot investigate itself. That is clear, at least not now, until Jeff Sessions, if he's successful in cleaning it up. Who investigates what we now know?
Yeah, I don't like special counsels, but we need a second one. We called for it 6 months ago. Congressman Meadows, myself, and several other members called for a second special counsel. I don't know how else you clean this up. Mueller, if he would expand and look into this, I think he's inherently compromised. Jeff Sessions has recused himself. I see the only remedy is a second special counsel. I would add one thing, though. Don't pick someone from the swamp. Don't pick someone from Washington, D.C. Pick someone from some retired federal judge from Iowa or Oklahoma or somewhere. Pick someone, so some good prosecutors that come in that when they complete their investigation, the American people can say, okay, there's a conclusion that we understand and help restore confidence in this great this agency.
A lot of people are saying to restore confidence, a couple of other people have to go. In particular, one of the people who signed at least one of the FISA warrants, and that's Rod Rosenstein. What do you say on that?
Yeah, we'll see. What I do know is Jim Comey is gone. Andrew McCabe is scheduled to leave. Jim Rubicki, who was the chief of staff, is leaving. Jim Baker has been reassigned. He was general counsel at the FBI. Peter Strzok has been reassigned. Lisa Page has been reassigned. And, of course, Bruce Orr has also been demoted at the Justice. So the top people, this cabal that was doing all this, there's been lots of changes there. I think that's a good thing.
And finally, we only have about 15 seconds, but isn't Russia's interference in the election key to understanding what was happening to these FISA warrants, because Fusion GPS was involved in Russian interests? And therefore, why isn't Mueller investigating this?
He may be. We don't know. We hear a lot about him looking at obstruction. What we do know is to date, not one bit of evidence of coordination between the Trump campaign and Russians to influence the election. But we know the Clinton campaign certainly tried to influence it.
But Mueller is not interested in whether FISA warrants were obtained under false pretenses.
I don't know. I don't know what he's focused on. I know what he's supposed to be focused on, and we don't have any evidence of that right now.
Congressman Jim Jordan, congratulations, and keep up the good work. We thank you for coming here.
You bet, David. Thank you.
Coming up next, the memo's out. Now many Americans are demanding a purge of deep state bias at the FBI and the DOJ. Our panel talking about the next shoe to drop when we come back.
There's a reason why it's the #1 show on business television.
Much more to go, much more to do.
Only on Fox Business Network.
In our online poll last night, we asked you, do you believe the Dems will pay a high price for trying to withhold evidence of FBI and deep state corruption from the American people? 88% of you say yes. Joining me now is radio talk show host Dom Giordano and RNC spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany. Good to see you both. Kayleigh, first to you. I'm interested in knowing how the press is going to spin all this. It's quite clear that this memo has revealed some startling information. How do they present it? How do you think they're going to present it over this weekend?
Oh, that's a great question. When you turn on the Sunday shows this weekend, you're going to see them saying this Nunes memo is full of mistruths, full of falsehood, full of selective facts. Meanwhile, the Democrats are scrambled at the last moment to come up with their alternate memo. That is the true anti-factual memo. But they'll try to say that there's another set of facts that Nunes left out. It's spin, it's mainstream media bias, and it's why the mainstream media has single-digit approval ratings.
Well, and Dom, they were also embarrassed by the fact that they took a position. There's a big movie out now. A lot of people have been writing about this hypocrisy about the Washington Post and their revelation of the Pentagon Papers back 30 years ago, 40 years ago, talking about how brave they were to come out with the truth. Now we have a situation where they're trying to hide the truth, or at least they were until the memo came out today. The hypocrisy is just shocking, no?
That's being seen as bravery, too, which is hiding the truth. And in addition to that, what they're going to do, I agree with Kayleigh. One, they're going to say we haven't seen the Democrat memo enough. Two, they're going to go all out to say that people like me, I'll speak for myself and others, are tarnishing the FBI. How dare we? We are not going after the people at the lower levels, the field, but we're up to double figures now of people at the upper echelon of the FBI who clearly have been out of control here.
But Kayleigh, I'm shaking my head, not because I have disdain for the FBI. Most of the FBI, I think, are heroic people, the agents who go out in the field and prevent bad things from happening. But to have the left of this country talk about how they come to the defense of the FBI. They criticize the FBI every chance they get in movies about corruption in law enforcement, specifically targeting the FBI. It's so hypocritical. I don't think the public buys it anymore. Do you?
David, there's no way the public buys it. We had 8 years of Obama, and it was the most anti-police, anti-law enforcement administration we've ever had in the history of this country. So for Democrats to all of a sudden act as if the Republican Party, the party that's restored faith in law enforcement and the rank and file of the FBI, is somehow tarnishing the rank and file at the FBI, it's false, it's hypocritical, people see through it.
Well, Dom, one of the ways in which the media got kind of caught in a trap is because of the fact that they bought into the Trump dossier. We know from court records that Mr. Steele, who actually wrote the dossier, spewed it out to a number of media people that ate it up as quickly as they could because it dumped on Trump so much. Of course, it was totally salacious. Most, if not all of it, was false. But now people like Michael Isikoff, who used to be with Newsweek, I don't know who he's working with now, but the fact is that he broadcasted and they were caught cold by this stuff that was completely wrong.
Yeah, it's Trump derangement syndrome again. They believe that, of course, Trump would be going to Russia and doing all this type of stuff. And, David, as a result, they've gotten caught up into this. And after their initial findings were wrong, they doubled and tripled down. And I predict they're not going to give up. They're not going to be on board. There's going to be, Republicans are right, there's going to be a more all-out fight. But guys like Jim Jordan are the heroes in this that continue to methodically pursue this.
But, Kayleigh, what do these journalists like Michael Isikoff say? I mean, they clearly bought into something that was wrong. Now their foolishness is being highlighted by this memo and these FISA warrants.
Right. And you know what this shows, David, is the danger of fake news. That was a fake news article that Isikoff wrote in Yahoo News. It was used as part of the basis, part of the essential basis for spying on a Trump campaign volunteer and therefore by proxy spying on Trump himself and those around him. Yeah. Fake news has consequences. We have to remember that. Somehow there's something very apropos of it being Yahoo News, that there's something very Yahoo notion about this whole thing. Guys, have a wonderful Super Bowl weekend. Great to see you all. A very busy news cycle. We appreciate you joining us. Dom and Kayleigh, thanks very much. Have a good weekend. And that's it for us tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Congress.